Comic news rarely misses me, and more rarely does it manage to elude me as to what it's actually about. A friend of mine, who in the words of George Carlin, happens to be black, shared something that was along the lines of, well, I guess they're making Black Panther white. And I was astonished because that seems like something that no one should actually be doing. But in a subsequent post, he also mentioned that he can't be upset because there's been plenty of white characters like Lightning Lad and Cyclone, Wally West, and Perry White who have also been race swapped. And first of all, I had to go do some research and find out exactly what it was he was talking about. Second, I wanted to talk about the second part about race swapping of white characters as well. So today we're reviewing Christopher Priest and Joe Quesada's Black Panther: The World to Come. And we're also going to talk about race swapping of characters. I'm Dan Unthan, and this is the Doomcast. Alright, first off, do me a favor, hit subscribe and the bell. I make about one of these videos a week. They are all great, so please, I don't want you to miss even one. Now, in short, no, they aren't making the Black Panther white. That would be crazy, but I think that you are meant to think that they are based on what Marvel chose to tease. They are revealing a man who is apparently T'Challa's son in the future, who is a white dude with an implied mom that is also a black woman, so that's very interesting how you get that Punnett square. But it's also not clear if this man who is referred to as a son, Kitoma, is in fact his biological son, his adopted son. He also, in the comic, doesn't end up beating T'Challa in the tribal battle that would allow him to become Black Panther, so he is not officially the Black Panther either. Even in the time and the telling of the story, T'Challa retains his title. So the story itself is told in a flashback, a series of vignettes after this apparent son, assumed to be the same person who's shown on the last panel, is implied to be the now king in the world to come. And that man has died. But the story itself covers several different eras and is told piecemeal in a retrospective from somebody who saw the future history of T'Challa firsthand. T'Challa, the Black Panther in our current time, is grieving the split with Aurora, so decides to rekindle an old romance in hopes of marriage and siring an heir to the throne of Wakanda himself in order to preserve its peace. Now, I'm not going to reveal every single aspect of the story because, for one, you should read it, and for two, because Priest is writing it, and he's an incredible writer and also responsible for crafting a lot of the lore that has built Wakanda into the fictional world that it is today. So I can assure you that it's not only worth your time, but also that he's probably misdirecting people on purpose because he's a master at what he does. What the story is an incredibly well-drawn first issue groundwork of what feels like Black Panther's old man Logan, just in that it is a future history, a reckoning that may end up defining the character for years. Joe Quesada's art is vivid, bright, richly detailed, and as always, the oil paint style of colors that was applied in this book makes all of that art pop. It's great to see Quesada back on a main book with great pencils. So, while I'm stoked for the rest of the book, here's why I don't think Priest's move to give T'Challa a white son, or to make the Black Panther white, if he actually does decide to do that, is that big of a deal. 2 words. It's fiction. It's also provocative. It is also meant to be provocative. A lot of people think that stories need to remain static or stay in the second act, as comic books often do, and people tend to think that because they aren't writers. This is clearly a 3rd or 5th act story that Priest is laying the groundwork for, and he's putting it to paper. I need you to trust him, and I need you to let him write. But let's get to that second bullet point about race swapping of characters, because as a white dude, I just don't care if they make random characters black. Do I have love for my gingers, the Celtic people who were scattered to the 4 winds of the North Atlantic themselves as victims of a genocide by Julius Caesar himself? Sure, yes, I absolutely do. But do I think that it matters if Wally West has a brother named Wally West who is, in fact, a brother? No. I mean, it means more for there to be a black Wally West, frankly. In fact, if you told your friend that you knew a person in real life whose name was Walter West or Perry White, and you had never met them, What race would you think that that dude was? Exactly. And I don't expect to meet a Perry White in 2025 and expect him to be white. The entire concept of a superhero has baked into it the idea of powerless people being given agency and power under oppressive regimes or systems or forces that they can't overcome as mere human beings. Crime, poverty, governments, supervillainy, all of this is overcome by metaphors constructed as ideal everymen or everywomen, sensational power standing up to cruelty. The idea that they would all be white as they had to be in the early days of the comic book code is laughable. Black Panther was created intentionally as representation in comics by Kirby and Lee. So when you say create another character of that race, then yeah, they did. They did as early as the 60s. But having foregrounded characters who are people of color creates a more realistic picture of the rest of the world. Oh golly, they made Lightning Lad and Cyclone black. Yeah, because there were no black people on their teams in the 30s and the 50s, respectively, when they got created. Also, do we think that there's going to be more redheads or black people in the year 3000 with Lightning Lad? I'm sorry, but maybe they will have to vat grow redheads. And I say that as a redhead. Also, please don't pretend that you cared about Lightning Lad or anything else to begin with. There hasn't been a steady Legion book in over 12 issues for over 3 decades, so miss me with all of that. Having representation in media, especially race swapping a white character to a person of color, absolutely is acceptable because it does not harm white people as a social construct. As the social construct of whiteness holds a political power or cultural hegemony, and people of color inherently currently do not have that kind of power in which whiteness exists. More on that in just a second. 2, wherever there is a creation of a race swap character, the original white character generally almost always still remains. And just as a little bit of education here, when I mention whiteness, or I say that there is no white culture, it's true, because white is not a race, not a nationality, not a culture. It is a social construct created by colonialism over the last 500 years. Not all white people, and that is to say Europeans, have always been white. Italians, Slavs, Roma, Iberians, Catalonians, some French people, Persians, Irish, Manx, Scots, and other people were not considered white enough for a long period of that time. There's Norwegians, there's Swedes, there's Scandinavians, there's Germans, there's Belgians, there's immigrants from any other country, and those have their own individual culture. But those cultures have been robbed and stolen in the United States of America, assimilated to give power to wealth. You have been robbed of your actual cultural heritage by capital, the same way as black people. Let me walk that back a little bit. Not the same way, but the system of oppression that robbed you and the system of oppression that robbed them are in this fact the same. Oh, how is there black culture in the United States then? The people kidnapped and brought here were not assimilated into the dominant white culture. They were never accepted. They were never expected to assimilate. They retained often their West African roots and their customs, albeit with some changes that ended up blending a lot of those traditions together. From their lost nations and their lost tribes, they developed a culture that is distinct and their own in a land that was not theirs and was never intended to be theirs. That is to say, blackness became its own culture. Anyway, that's my point about whiteness, and was one of the points of the film Sinners, if you were actually paying attention, that everybody's culture has been stolen by one machine, or the vampire in this case. Anyway, great movie. You should see it. Last point, and I'm going to leave you with this. Having representation in media is clearly important, and I can tell you why it is. If it wasn't, you wouldn't be fighting so hard against it. If it was dumb and unnecessary, then it would have just fizzled out and died on the vine on its own long ago. But movies like Black Panther, books, comics, TV, that feature characters of color do make a difference for viewers of color, and those viewers aren't dwindling in number, and their revenue spends exactly the same to companies. Bottom line, it's good for business. And I'm not even going to pretend that it isn't. If DC figured out that they could make a cool $2 billion from a James Gunn-produced Ryan Coogler Val Zod Earth 2 Superman movie starring Michael B. Jordan, they would make that movie in a heartbeat. And let me tell you, they absolutely should. And based on the success of Sinners, they just might. So, I hope that this has been educational, and I hope that you have a great week. Also, go out, pick up Black Panther: The World to Come. Thanks, take care, have a great weekend, and peace.